The flight was boarding late. Not dramatically late, just late enough to make people impatient, just late enough to sharpen entitlement into irritation. Gate 32 buzzed with quiet complaints, rolling suitcases, and the hum of people who believed their time mattered more than everyone else's. Elias Morgan sat alone near the window. Seat 3A. First class. He hadn't rushed. He never did. At 39, Elias had learned that urgency was often a disguise for insecurity. He dressed simply, dark jacket, plain shirt, no logos. His phone stayed face down. A thin folder rested on his lap, untouched. To anyone watching, he looked like someone passing through. That was intentional. The woman who noticed. Charlotte Reynolds noticed him immediately. She always noticed people who didn't perform power correctly. Charlotte moved through the cabin like it belonged to her. Not loudly, not clumsily, but with the precise confidence of someone who had never been told no without consequences. Her heels clicked against the aisle floor as she scanned seats, faces, status. When her eyes landed on Elias, something tightened. It wasn't anger. It was disbelief. She checked her boarding pass again. Seat 3B. Next to him. Charlotte stopped. She looked at Elias. Then at the seat number. Then back at Elias. Her lips pressed together. A lifetime of assumptions. Charlotte Reynolds had spent 46 years learning how to read rooms. Who mattered? Who didn't? Who needed to be impressed? Who needed to be corrected? She was very good at it. Her husband's name opened doors. Her last name closed arguments. Airlines upgraded her, without explanation. Restaurants found tables that didn't exist 5 minutes earlier. And people like Elias Morgan? They sat quietly in the background. They didn't occupy premium space. The first comment. Charlotte leaned slightly toward him. "Excuse me," she said, polite enough to sound reasonable. "I think you're in the wrong seat." Elias looked up slowly. He didn't frown, didn't smile, didn't rush. "I'm in 3A, he replied calmly. Charlotte's eyebrows lifted. "Yes," she said, smiling thinly. "First class." Elias nodded. "That's correct." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Perhaps the gate agent made a mistake. Elias held up his boarding pass. Charlotte glanced at it for half a second, long enough to register the seat number, not long enough to accept it. She exhaled sharply. "Well," she said, straightening, "this is unexpected." Eyes began to watch. The man across the aisle paused his reading. A flight attendant slowed her steps. Small moments like this created ripples. Charlotte felt them, and resented them. She leaned closer, lowering her voice, not to be discreet, but to be dominant. "May I ask," she said, "what you do?" Elias met her gaze. "I attend meetings," he said. She laughed lightly. "That wasn't what I meant." "I know." That irritated her. The line that shouldn't have been crossed. Charlotte turned toward the flight attendant. "Could you check his ticket?" she asked, gesturing toward Elias without looking at him. "I'm uncomfortable." The attendant hesitated. "Ma'am, he is seated correctly." Charlotte tilted her head. "Uncomfortable," she repeated, as if saying it louder would make it truer. Elias said nothing. That was the problem. Silence as a weapon. Charlotte had never learned how to sit with silence. She filled it with commentary. "You know," she said loudly now, "I fly this route often. And usually first class is consistent." Elias continued to sit still. The attendant stiffened. "Ma'am." Charlotte waved her hand dismissively. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." No one said anything. Because no one was. Elias Morgan's choice. Elias could have ended it there. He could have said his name. Could have explained why he was on that plane, in that seat, with that folder. But he didn't. Because power revealed itself more honestly when it wasn't announced. He turned slightly toward the window. Charlotte scoffed. "That's rude." Elias spoke without looking at her. "So is deciding who belongs." The words landed softly. And sharply. Something shifts. Charlotte felt it. That tiny moment when certainty wavered. She straightened her coat. "You don't know who I am," she said. Elias nodded. "And you don't know who I'm not." That did it. Charlotte laughed, too loud, too quick. This flight is already a mess, she muttered. Unbelievable. She flagged the attendant again. I want this documented. Elias closed his folder. The cover read, in small understated letters, Morgan and Hale, board review. Charlotte didn't notice. Yet. The plane pushes back. As the aircraft began to taxi, the cabin settled. Seatbelts clicked. Engines hummed. Charlotte crossed her arms, staring straight ahead. Elias looked calm, but inside he was counting. Not minutes. Not hours. Decisions. Because this flight wasn't an accident. And Charlotte Reynolds had just become part of a story she didn't know she was auditioning for. Silence bothered Charlotte Reynolds more than insults ever could. Insults could be confronted. Silence had to be broken. The plane lifted smoothly off the runway, New York shrinking into a grid of lights beneath the clouds. First class settled into its practiced calm, soft lighting, the faint clink of glassware, restrained conversation. Charlotte sat rigidly in seat 3B, arms crossed, jaw tight. Elias Morgan sat beside her, unmoving, gaze forward. He hadn't apologized, hadn't explained, hadn't justified his presence. To Charlotte, that felt intentional. The flight attendant's smile. Would you care for a drink? The flight attendant asked, stopping between them. Elias glanced up. Sparkling water, please. Charlotte scoffed softly. Wine, she said. Red. The attendant nodded and moved on. Charlotte leaned back, eyes still forward. Interesting choice, she said. Water. Elias didn't respond. She waited. Nothing. Her fingers tightened against the armrest. Why it felt personal. Charlotte didn't hate Elias. That was the lie she almost believed. What she hated was the disruption of expectation. People like him weren't supposed to make her question herself. They weren't supposed to sit beside her in silence, unconcerned with her approval. And yet, here he was. Calm. Unbothered. As if her discomfort didn't matter. That, more than anything, felt like disrespect. The first escalation. Charlotte turned slightly toward him. You know, she said casually, people notice when someone doesn't belong. Elias looked at her this time. Not with anger. With curiosity. Do they? He asked. Yes, she replied confidently. It creates tension. Elias nodded once. I agree, he said. Assumptions are uncomfortable. Charlotte laughed sharply. That's clever, she said. But clever doesn't change reality. What does? Elias asked. Charlotte smiled. Credentials. Elias considered that. Sometimes, he said. That answer frustrated her. It wasn't defensive enough. Eyes around them. The man across the aisle pretended to read, but his attention drifted. The woman behind them shifted in her seat. Everyone felt it now, the subtle strain between two people occupying too little space with too much unspoken meaning. Charlotte noticed the attention and straightened. She liked witnesses. Witnesses validated her. The folder. Charlotte's eyes drifted to the folder on Elias's lap. Plain. Unmarked, except for a small line of text she hadn't noticed before. She leaned closer, peering. Morgan and Hale, she read aloud. What is that law? Elias closed the folder gently. Something like that. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. You don't look like a lawyer. Elias smiled faintly. And you don't look like an airline executive, he replied. The smile vanished from her face. That's inappropriate, she snapped. So is profiling, Elias said evenly. The wine arrives. The flight attendant returned with their drinks. Charlotte took her glass immediately, swirling the wine with practiced ease. She watched Elias lift his water, sip slowly. You're very composed, she said. I try to be, Elias replied. Charlotte tilted her head. Does that usually work for you? Yes, he said. Eventually. That word again. Eventually. It sounded like a warning. Charlotte's certainty cracks. Charlotte leaned back, studying him openly now. You know, she said, lowering her voice, if this is some kind of stunt. It isn't, Elias interrupted gently. She bristled. I didn't give you permission to interrupt me. Elias nodded. I didn't ask. Her breath caught. The audacity. She stared at him, stunned.
No one spoke to her like that.
Not without consequences. The moment she decides. Charlotte lifted her wine glass slightly, eyes never leaving his face. You think you're immune, she said. People like you always do. Elias watched the glass, then looked back at her. No, he said softly. I think consequences don't always come immediately. Charlotte smiled thinly. We'll see. A small, ugly choice. It happened faster than Elias expected. Charlotte shifted suddenly, her elbow jerking outward. The wine tipped. Red liquid splashed across Elias's jacket, staining the fabric dark. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Oh! Charlotte exclaimed, not sounding sorry at all. How clumsy of me. The flight attendant froze. I'm so sorry, Charlotte added, smiling tightly. Turbulence. There hadn't been any. Elias looked down at the spreading stain, then back at Charlotte. For a moment, the cabin held its breath. The calm that followed. Elias reached for a napkin.
Slowly. Carefully.
He dabbed at the spill, movements precise. No harm done, he said. Charlotte blinked. That's it, she asked incredulously. That's it, Elias replied. Her smile faltered. She had expected outrage, anger, submission. Not this. Documentation begins. The flight attendant stepped forward. Sir, would you like to file a report? Elias met her eyes. Yes, he said calmly. Please. Charlotte stiffened.
For what? She demanded.
Accuracy, Elias replied. The attendant nodded and moved away. Charlotte laughed uneasily. You're really doing this? Elias closed his folder, wine-stained jacket still draped over his arm. Yes, he said. I am. Charlotte feels it. For the first time since boarding, Charlotte felt something unfamiliar creep in. Not fear, but uncertainty. She had crossed a line expecting resistance. Instead, she'd met restraint. And restraint, she was beginning to realize, could be far more dangerous than confrontation. Records don't raise their voice. They don't react. They don't defend themselves. They simply exist.
And wait.
The cabin learns a new rule. After the wine spilled, the first-class cabin didn't return to normal. It pretended to. Conversations lowered in volume. Eyes avoided contact. Movements became deliberate. The flight attendant returned with a small incident form and a practiced calm that only came from training and experience. She handed it to Elias with a pen. Whenever you're ready, sir. Charlotte watched, disbelief etched into her face. You're actually writing this down? She asked, half laughing. Elias nodded without looking up. Yes. She scoffed. Over an accident? Elias paused, pen hovering. Accidents don't smile afterward, he said quietly. The pen touched paper. Charlotte felt the shift. Something had been taken out of her hands. Witnesses become aware. The man across the aisle cleared his throat. I saw it, he said, not looking at Charlotte. There wasn't any turbulence. Charlotte snapped her head toward him. Mind your business. He met her eyes. It became my business when you made it public. A woman too rose back nodded. So did I. Charlotte's cheeks flushed. She hadn't expected witnesses. She had expected spectators. Elias Morgan writes carefully. Elias didn't rush. He described what happened in neutral language, times, actions, words. No adjectives. No emotion. Charlotte leaned closer, trying to read. You're exaggerating, she said. Elias continued writing. You're leaving things out. Still writing. This is ridiculous. The pen stopped. Elias looked up. If you have corrections, he said calmly, you can submit your own statement. Charlotte opened her mouth. Closed it. She hated paperwork. Paper didn't respond to pressure. The captain is informed. The purser approached, posture firm. Mr. Morgan, he said, the captain has been notified. We'll note the incident and proceed unless further action is requested. Charlotte stiffened. You told the captain?
Yes.
Standard procedure. This is absurd, Charlotte snapped. I fly all the time. I know how this works. The purser nodded. Then you know documentation doesn't go away. Charlotte looked at Elias. Happy now? She asked sharply. Elias shook his head. I wasn't unhappy before. That answer unsettled her more than anger ever could. A memory Charlotte didn't invite. Charlotte stared out the window, jaw tight. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't immediately name. It wasn't guilt. It was exposure. She remembered another moment, years earlier, when an assistant had quietly stopped responding to her emails. When HR had requested a conversation. When her husband had suggested, gently, that maybe she should soften her tone. She had dismissed all of it. Now the same pattern was forming. At 30,000 feet, with nowhere to walk away. Elias receives a message. Elias's phone vibrated softly. No ringtone. No urgency. He glanced at the screen. Hail secure. Status? Elias typed a brief response. Incident documented. Witnesses present. No escalation requested. A pause.
Then,
Understood. Keep us posted. Elias slid the phone back into his pocket. Charlotte noticed. Calling for backup? She asked sarcastically. Elias met her gaze.
no, he said.
Just keeping a timeline. The thing about timelines. Timelines didn't care about reputation. They didn't bend for confidence. They stacked moments one on top of another until a pattern appeared. Charlotte sensed that instinctively. She crossed her legs, reasserting composure. This won't matter, she said. People like me don't get dragged into nonsense. Elias nodded. Usually, he agreed. The word echoed again. Usually. Dinner service. Trays arrived. Charlotte barely touched hers. Elias ate slowly, methodically. She watched him, irritation simmering. How do you do that? She asked suddenly. Do what? Act like none of this affects you. Elias considered the question. Because, he said, I've learned the difference between discomfort and danger. Charlotte frowned. And this isn't dangerous? For me? Elias asked.
No.
That answer landed heavier than he intended. The cabin chooses sides quietly. Later, as lights dimmed, the flight attendant returned with a fresh jacket for Elias. Compliments of the airline, she said. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. Elias accepted it with a nod. Thank you. The attendant glanced at Charlotte, then back at Elias. If you need anything else, sir.
Sir.
Charlotte noticed that. She noticed everything now. Charlotte tries one last angle. As the cabin settled into quiet, Charlotte leaned toward him again. Lower voice. Measured tone. You don't know what you're involving yourself in, she said. I have influence. Elias didn't turn. I know. You could make this go away, she continued. I could make things easier. Elias finally looked at her. By changing what happened? He asked. She hesitated. By reframing it. Elias shook his head. That's not how records work. Charlotte felt a chill. Somewhere above the Atlantic, the plane hummed steadily through darkness. Passengers slept. Lights dimmed further. Elias closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to think. Charlotte stared at the seat back in front of her. For the first time in a long time, she wondered, what if this doesn't end the way I expect? Landing strips away illusions. At cruising altitude, people pretend. On the ground, systems begin to work. Charlotte Reynolds felt that shift before the wheels even touched the runway. The descent. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and rehearsed. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly. Charlotte adjusted in her seat, smoothing her jacket, rehearsing her composure. She had already decided how this would end. A report. A minor note. Nothing lasting. That was how things always worked. Elias Morgan, seated beside her, looked out the window as the clouds thinned. City lights appeared below, scattered and distant. He didn't move. He didn't check his phone. He waited.
Touchdown.
The wheels hit the runway with a firm jolt. Reality arrived with them. Passengers exhaled. Phones came out. The cabin filled with the soft urgency of arrival. Charlotte stood immediately, pulling her bag from the overhead compartment with sharp movements. Elias waited. Excuse me, she snapped as she brushed past him. He stepped aside calmly. Of course. She paused just for a second. Something in his tone unsettled her. The jet bridge. The door opened. Cool air rushed in. Charlotte stepped into the jet bridge and stopped. Two airline security officers stood near the terminal entrance. Beside them was a woman in a dark blazer, holding a tablet. Charlotte's stomach tightened. "What is this?" she demanded. The woman stepped forward politely. "Ms. Reynolds." "Yes. I'm with corporate compliance. We need a moment of your time." Charlotte laughed sharply. "You can't be serious." Elias stepped off the plane behind her. The woman glanced at him. "Mr. Morgan?" "Yes. We've received an incident report regarding this flight," the woman said evenly. "With witnesses." Charlotte turned on Elias. "You did this." Elias met her eyes. "I documented what happened." The word that changes tone. Documented. Charlotte hated that word. It meant systems. Processes. People who didn't care who she was. "This is harassment," Charlotte snapped. "I want to file a complaint." "You're welcome to," the compliance officer replied calmly. "This is not disciplinary at this stage. It's procedural." Procedural. Charlotte felt the ground shift under her feet. Passengers become statements. As they stood there, passengers passed by, some glancing, some slowing. The man from across the aisle paused. "I'm willing to give a statement," he said. "So am I," the woman from 2 rows back added. Charlotte stared at them. "You don't even know what you're talking about." The compliance officer typed steadily. "Thank you," she said. "We'll note that." Charlotte's voice rose. "This is absurd. I didn't assault anyone." Elias spoke quietly. "No one said you did." She froze. That was worse. The private room. Charlotte was escorted, not grabbed, not restrained, into a glass-walled office near the gate. Visibility. Transparency. The compliance officer gestured to a chair. "Please sit." Charlotte didn't. "I have meetings," she snapped. "Important ones." "We won't keep you long," the officer replied. "We just need accuracy." Accuracy again. Charlotte finally sat. Elias remained standing near the door. "You don't need to be here," Charlotte said. "Yes," Elias replied calmly. "I do." The timeline appears. The compliance officer turned the tablet toward Charlotte. Time stamps. Seat numbers. Crew notes. Witness identifiers. A clean, neutral timeline. Charlotte's breath quickened. This is blown out of proportion.
Possibly, the officer said.
"That's why we verify." She looked at Elias. "You enjoy this?" Elias shook his head. "No," he said. "I respect it." The first call. Charlotte's phone buzzed. Signal restored. She answered immediately. "Yes." Her husband's voice came through, tense. "Charlotte, what's going on?" "I just got a call from legal." Her heart dropped. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "A misunderstanding." There was a pause. "They said it involves a compliance review." Charlotte's mouth went dry. "I'll explain later." She snapped and hung up. She looked up to see the compliance officer watching quietly. Elias steps back. After the statements were taken, the officer nodded. "That's all for now. We may follow up." Charlotte stood abruptly. "This better disappear," she said. The officer met her gaze. "Records don't disappear," she replied. Elias stepped aside as Charlotte stormed out. He watched her go, not satisfied, not angry, just aware. Outside, alone. Charlotte stood in the terminal, heart racing. For the first time in years, no one hurried to smooth things over. No apology from staff. No quiet upgrade. No special treatment. Just process. And witnesses. Elias receives confirmation. Elias's phone vibrated. "Hail secure. Compliance acknowledged. Review opened." Elias typed back. "Understood." He looked around the terminal. People moved freely, unaware. That was how consequences began. Quietly. Power doesn't disappear all at once. It hesitates first. It pauses. It stops responding as quickly as it used to. Charlotte Reynolds felt that silence the moment she stepped into the car outside the terminal. the ride that felt different. Her driver asked, "Office or home, ma'am?" Charlotte opened her mouth, then stopped.
Office.
That was the instinct. Control. Damage management.
Spin.
But something in her chest tightened. "Office," she said anyway. The car pulled into traffic. Charlotte stared out the window, replaying the jet bridge scene again and again. The compliance officer's neutral voice. The witnesses stepping forward without hesitation. Elias Morgan standing calmly, as if he had known exactly how this would unfold. She hated that most of all. The call that didn't come. Normally, by now, her phone would have rung. Legal.
PR.
Someone reassuring her that this would be handled quietly. It didn't. She checked her phone again. Nothing. That silence felt wrong. Elias Morgan, elsewhere. Elias didn't go to the airport lounge. He didn't call a car. He took the train. It gave him time to think. His reflection in the dark window looked ordinary. That was fine. It always had been. His phone buzzed once. Hail, secure. Initial review expanding. Patterns search initiated. Elias exhaled slowly. That was faster than expected. Charlotte arrives at the office. The lobby of Reynolds Group felt unchanged. Polished floors. Neutral art. Quiet efficiency. Charlotte walked in expecting recognition. Instead, she received politeness. Not deference. Not urgency. Politeness. "Good afternoon," the receptionist said. "Can I help you?" Charlotte stopped. "It's Charlotte," she said sharply. "Yes, ma'am," the receptionist replied. "Please sign in." Charlotte stared at the clipboard. She hadn't signed in for years. The first barrier. Her assistant, Maya, met her halfway down the corridor. Maya looked nervous. "Charlotte," she said quietly. "Legal asked me to hold your meetings." Charlotte's stomach dropped. "Why?" "They said it's precautionary." That word again. Charlotte forced a smile. "Tell them to release my calendar." Maya hesitated. "I can't." Charlotte felt heat rise in her chest. "Since when do you tell me no?" Maya swallowed. "Since legal told me to." The file she didn't expect. In her office, Charlotte found a folder on her desk. No cover. Just a sticky note. "Please review." Inside were summaries. HR complaints. Exit interviews. Legal settlements. Some she recognized. Others she didn't. But the language was consistent. Intimidating. Dismissive. Hostile environment. Charlotte's hands trembled. "This is selective," she muttered. But even as she said it, she knew better. The board call. The phone rang. Finally. "Charlotte," the board chair said calmly. "We need to talk." She sat down slowly. "This is being exaggerated," she said immediately. The chair didn't interrupt. That silence again. "We've opened a formal review," he said. "External." Charlotte laughed sharply. "You're overreacting." "We're responding," he corrected. Charlotte leaned forward. "You know who I am to this company." "Yes," the chair replied. "And that's why this matters." Her breath caught. "Are you suspending me?" "Administrative leave," he said. "Effective immediately." The words felt unreal. "This is temporary," she said quickly. "It depends," he replied. "On what?" "On what the review finds." The call ended. The cracks appear. Charlotte sat alone in her office. No one knocked. No one rushed in to reassure her. She stared at the city through the glass wall. For the first time, she wondered, who am I without this? Elias receives the update. Elias stepped off the train. His phone buzzed. "Hail, secure. Subject placed on administrative leave. Board cooperating." Elias typed back. "Proceed." He didn't feel relief. He felt confirmation. Charlotte goes home early. That evening, Charlotte left the office before sunset. Security nodded politely. No escort. No confrontation. Just procedure. At home, the house felt too quiet. Her husband wasn't there yet. She poured herself a drink.
Didn't finish it.
The first honest thought. Charlotte sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. For the first time, a thought surfaced that she couldn't push away. What if this isn't about the flight? The question lingered. Uncomfortable. persistent. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in. Charlotte Reynolds noticed it the next morning, standing in her kitchen, staring at a phone that refused to vibrate. No early emails. No urgent texts. No assistant checking her schedule. Nothing. Silence had always been something she imposed on others. Now it surrounded her. The headlines she didn't expect. She opened her laptop. Typed her company's name. Nothing dramatic appeared. No scandalous exposé. No viral outrage. Just a short business brief buried beneath market updates. Reynolds Group chair placed on administrative leave, pending review. No adjectives. No emotion. Just fact. Charlotte read it 3 times. This wasn't public punishment. It was worse. It was normalization. The world keeps moving. By noon, the city outside her window looked exactly the same. Traffic flowed. People hurried. Meetings happened without her. Charlotte had always believed her presence anchored things. Now she saw the truth. Systems didn't need personalities. They needed continuity. And continuity didn't wait. Elias Morgan watches from afar. Elias sat in a quiet conference room 2 states away, listening to a presentation he barely needed. His attention drifted, not to Charlotte herself, but to the pattern unfolding. This phase was always the same.
Shock.
Isolation. Rationalization. The most dangerous moment wasn't anger. It was denial dressed as dignity. His phone buzzed once. Hail secure. Media interest minimal. Internal pressure increasing. Elias typed back. Expected. Continue monitoring. He closed the app. He knew what came next. Charlotte's first outreach. Charlotte called her longtime PR consultant. Straight to voicemail. She left a message. Measured, professional. Call me when you can. She waited. An hour passed. Then 2. She checked her sent emails. No replies. Not even acknowledgements. She stared at the screen, irritation giving way to something colder. They're waiting, she realized. They're waiting to see what sticks. The friend who didn't defend her. Charlotte met her oldest friend, Dana, for lunch. Dana arrived on time, but her smile was restrained. I'm glad you reached out, Dana said carefully. Charlotte leaned forward. You know this is nonsense. Dana paused. I know it's complicated, she replied. Charlotte frowned. That's not what I said. Dana sighed. Charlotte, people are talking. Charlotte stiffened. People always talk. Yes, Dana said gently. But this time they're comparing notes. The words landed hard. Comparing notes. Charlotte pushed her chair back slightly. You think I deserve this? Dana didn't answer immediately. I think, she said, that a lot of people have been waiting a long time for someone to listen. Charlotte stood. Lunch was over. Isolation sharpens memory. That night, Charlotte couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed conversations she had dismissed. The assistant who had gone quiet. The executive who had resigned suddenly. The HR meeting she had ended early. At the time, each had felt minor. Now they formed a shape, a pattern. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. This is being exaggerated, she whispered. But the room didn't respond. Elias receives a call. Late that evening, Elias's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. This is Elias Morgan. A measured voice responded. We're conducting an external review related to an in-flight incident. You filed a report. Yes. We may need additional context. Elias didn't hesitate. I'm available. After the call ended, Elias sat quietly. This wasn't escalation. It was confirmation. Charlotte's house feels smaller. The following day, Charlotte stayed home. She watched the sun move across the floor. She noticed things she never had before. The hum of appliances, the echo of footsteps, the absence of interruption. Her husband came home late. He didn't ask how her day was. They ate dinner quietly. Finally, he spoke. Legal called me today. Charlotte's chest tightened. What did they say? That I should prepare, he replied, carefully, for different outcomes. Charlotte's voice rose. You believe this? He looked at her, not angry, not accusing.
Tired.
I believe something's been wrong for a long time, he said. That hurt more than anything else. The first honest question. After he went to bed, Charlotte stayed at the table. She opened the folder from her office again. Read the statements more carefully this time. Not defensively. Curiously. Her hands shook. For the first time, she asked a question she had never allowed herself to ask. What if they're right? The thought terrified her. But it didn't leave. Elias writes one line. Elias opened a secure document. Typed a single sentence. Accountability begins when denial ends. He saved it. Not for Charlotte. For himself. The story didn't explode. It leaked. Slowly. Quietly. In fragments that were harder to fight. Charlotte Reynolds first noticed it when her name appeared in places she didn't control. Not headlines. Footnotes. The article nobody celebrated. A business newsletter published a short piece late Friday evening. No accusation. No outrage. Just context. Sources confirm the internal review at Reynolds Group extends beyond the recent in-flight incident and includes prior workplace complaints. Charlotte read the sentence again. And again. Beyond the incident. Her phone buzzed. Not friends. Journalists. She didn't answer. The statement she almost released. Her legal team drafted a response. Careful language. Measured tone. No admission. It's important to emphasize that Ms. Reynolds denies any pattern of misconduct. Charlotte stared at the screen. This was familiar territory. Control the message. Minimize exposure. Wait it out. She hovered over send. Then stopped. Something inside her shifted. Denying the pattern won't erase it, she thought. She closed the laptop. Her lawyer called immediately. Why haven't you approved the statement? Charlotte exhaled. Because it feels dishonest. There was a long pause. That's not our usual concern, the lawyer said carefully. I know, Charlotte replied, and ended the call. Public pressure, without noise. The pressure didn't come from outrage. It came from distance. Invitations quietly withdrawn. Boards postponing meetings. Colleagues replying slower. Charlotte walked through a grocery store unnoticed. For the first time in years, no one recognized her. It should have felt freeing. It felt empty. Elias Morgan reads the shift. Elias noticed the change in tone immediately. Not escalation. Acceptance. Organizations were adjusting their posture, not defensively, but cautiously. Preparing for something longer than a scandal. His phone buzzed. Hail secure. Subject considering non-defensive approach. Unusual. Elias typed back. That's when real change begins. Or real collapse. He put the phone away. The interview request. A journalist emailed Charlotte directly. No ambush. No deadline threat. Just a request. Off the record. Context only. Charlotte stared at the message. Old instincts screamed no. New awareness whispered maybe. She agreed. The conversation that hurt more. They met in a quiet cafe. No cameras. No notes. Just questions. Do you believe you abused power? The journalist asked gently. Charlotte bristled. I wouldn't use that word. What word would you use? Charlotte hesitated. Demanding. The journalist nodded. And how did that feel to the people under you? Charlotte's throat tightened. I didn't ask, she admitted. The journalist didn't press. She didn't need to. The quote Charlotte didn't control. The article ran 2 days later. Still restrained. Still calm. But one line stood out. Reynolds acknowledged she never asked how her leadership felt to those beneath her. Charlotte read it once. Then, again. It wasn't an attack. It was worse. It was accurate. The night everything collapsed. That evening, Charlotte sat alone in her living room. Lights off. City noise drifting in. She replayed the flight again. The way Elias hadn't reacted. The way witnesses had spoken up. The way systems had engaged without emotion. For the first time, she saw the moment clearly. It wasn't about him. It had never been. It was about the certainty she carried, that she belonged wherever she decided she did. She whispered into the empty room. I didn't think I was hurting anyone. The words felt hollow. Intent didn't erase impact. Elias receives confirmation. Elias received a final update from Hale. Hale secure. Review concluding. Findings consistent. Board preparing structural changes. Elias replied. Understood. He didn't celebrate.
He rarely did.
Charlotte makes a choice. The next morning, Charlotte emailed the board herself. No lawyer. No draft. Just words. I will cooperate fully with the review. I will not contest its findings. The response came hours later. Brief. Formal. Acknowledged. Charlotte closed her laptop. For the first time since the flight, she felt something settle. Not relief. Acceptance. The moral collapse. Charlotte Reynolds had lost her defense. Not because it was taken, but because she no longer believed in it. That was the real collapse. Accountability doesn't arrive with handcuffs. It arrives with limits. Charlotte Reynolds discovered this the morning her access badge stopped working. The door that didn't open. She stood in the lobby of Reynolds Group, dressed simply, no statement jewelry, no tailored armor. The glass doors reflected her back at herself, someone familiar, yet altered. She tapped her badge. Red light. She tried again. Nothing. The security guard approached, polite but firm. Ms. Reynolds, I'll need to escort you upstairs. Charlotte nodded. She didn't argue. That alone felt strange. The room without power. The boardroom was full. Every seat taken. Charlotte's chair, her chair, was empty. The board chair gestured to a seat along the wall. Not at the table. Charlotte sat. No one spoke for a moment. Then the chair began. The external review is complete. Charlotte folded her hands. She listened. The findings. The language was careful. Clinical. Patterns of intimidation. Dismissive conduct. Failure to respond to internal warnings. Not monstrous. Worse. Consistent. Charlotte felt heat rise in her chest. Not anger, but recognition. She had seen these words before, just never attached to her name. Elias Morgan's absence. Elias was not in the room. He never was. His work had never required presence, only structure. The board chair continued. The decision is to remove Ms. Reynolds permanently from executive authority. Charlotte inhaled slowly. Not shocked. Prepared. You will retain equity, the chair added, but no governance role. No advisory position. Charlotte nodded. I understand. Some board members looked surprised. They had expected resistance. The question that changed the tone. The chair hesitated. Do you have anything you wish to say? Charlotte looked around the room. Faces she had once intimidated. Others she had ignored. A few who had quietly enabled her. Yes, she said. The room stilled. I won't contest this decision, Charlotte said calmly. And I won't ask for language that softens it. A murmur rippled. I failed to listen when it mattered, she continued. And I'm responsible for the culture that followed. She paused. I won't pretend this is redemption, she added. It's consequence. Silence followed. Then the chair nodded. The public notice. The announcement went out that afternoon. Brief. Neutral. Reynolds Group announces leadership transition following external review. No blame. No praise. Charlotte read it without flinching. This was what accountability looked like. Not humiliation. Removal. Elias Morgan reflects. Elias sat alone in a quiet office, reviewing final notes. The pattern had completed. Not with revenge. With recalibration. He typed one last message. To Hale. Close file. Monitor structural compliance only. He closed the folder. Another system corrected. Another silence restored. Charlotte's first day, without title. The next day, Charlotte woke without an agenda. No calendar alerts. No assistant messages. She walked outside. The city felt louder. Unconcerned. She stopped at a cafe she had passed for years without entering. The barista smiled. What can I get you? Charlotte hesitated. Then smiled back. Coffee, she said. Just coffee. No one rushed. No one deferred. The world didn't bend. And for the first time, she didn't try to make it. The quiet reckoning. That evening, Charlotte opened a notebook. Not to plan. To record. Moments she had ignored. Warnings she had dismissed. People she had reduced to obstacles.
She didn't justify them.
She named them. That hurt more than any headline ever could. Elias receives a final call. Elias's phone rang. It was the compliance officer from the airline. "We're closing the file," she said. "Thank you for your cooperation." Elias nodded. "Thank you for your accuracy." After the call, he sat quietly. The flight felt distant now, but its consequences remained. The shape of change. Change didn't look dramatic. It looked like restraint. It looked like listening. It looked like walking past doors that once opened automatically and accepting that they no longer did. Charlotte Reynolds was learning that. Slowly. Painfully. Honestly. Life doesn't wait for reckoning to finish. It keeps moving. Indifferent. Unsentimental. Forcing people to either adapt or disappear. Charlotte Reynolds was learning which one she would be. Months later, the headlines had faded. Not because they were disproven, but because the world had absorbed them. Charlotte's name still existed, but it no longer carried weight. She was no longer introduced, no longer deferred to, no longer anticipated. She had become background. At first, that felt like punishment. Later, it felt like clarity. The work that no one applauded. Charlotte took consulting work through a nonprofit. No authority, no branding, no influence. Just rooms where people were afraid to speak. And systems that rewarded silence. She wasn't there to lead. She was there to listen. And listening, she discovered, was exhausting in a way power never had been. The executive who tested her. During one session, a senior manager scoffed. "This is all overcorrection," he said. "People are too sensitive now." The room tightened. Old instincts stirred. Correct him. Shut him down. Reassert control. Charlotte paused. She felt the instinct fully, then let it pass. "Say more," she said instead. The manager faltered. He wasn't used to being asked that. As he spoke, others joined in. Voices that had waited years. Charlotte listened. She didn't defend herself. She didn't rescue him. She let the system respond. That was the difference. Elias Morgan, unchanged. Elias's life looked the same. Same pace. Same discretion. Same distance from noise. But something subtle had shifted. Executives now paused more often in meetings. Legal language had sharpened. Cultural clauses had become standard. Not because of fear. Because documentation worked. Elias watched quietly. Correction didn't need recognition. It needed permanence. The invitation. Charlotte received an email one evening. No sender name. Just a question. "Would you be willing to speak to our junior leadership team?" Off the record. She stared at the screen. This wasn't a return. This was a test. She replied with one sentence. "Only if they're allowed to challenge me." The response came quickly. "That's why we asked." The conversation that defined her. The room was small. No hierarchy. No elevated seats. One young woman raised her hand. "Why should we believe you've changed?" she asked directly. Charlotte didn't rush. "You shouldn't," she said honestly. "You should believe patterns, not statements." The room went quiet. Another voice followed. "Then why are you here?" Charlotte met their eyes. "Because someone once sat silently across from me," she said, "and I mistook that silence for insignificance." No names. No dramatics. Just truth. The flight revisited. That night, Charlotte replayed the flight again. But differently now. Not with defensiveness. With understanding. Elias hadn't embarrassed her. He hadn't attacked her. He had simply refused to disappear. And systems had done the rest. Elias receives the last update. Elias's phone buzzed once. "Hail secure. All compliance structures stable. No regression detected." Elias typed back.
Good.
He placed the phone down. Some stories ended with confrontation. Others ended with correction. This one had done its job. Charlotte's quiet realization. Walking home that evening, Charlotte passed a glass building with her former company's logo replaced by something new. She stopped. Not in anger. Not in grief. In recognition. She hadn't been erased. She had been revised. And revision, she realized, was harder than destruction. The last line before the end. Charlotte sat at her desk later that night and wrote one final sentence in her notebook. Power ends. Impact doesn't. She closed the book. The world didn't end with a headline. It rarely does. There was no dramatic press conference. No viral clip. No apology tour. What followed was quieter. And far more permanent. 1 year later, the building no longer bore Charlotte Reynolds' name. Reynolds Group had rebranded quietly, carefully, the way organizations do when they want distance without confession. New leadership spoke a different language now about process, culture, guardrails. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. Employees still argued. Deadlines still hurt. Profits still mattered. What in return was fear disguised as efficiency. That absence was Charlotte's unseen fingerprint. Charlotte Reynolds, unnamed. Charlotte lived in a smaller city now. No skyline views. No private drivers. No invitations that arrived without asking. Her days were structured but simple. Morning walks. Reading. Occasional facilitation work for organizations that knew exactly who she was and invited her anyway. She never led. She advised, listened, and left. Some rooms welcomed her cautiously. Others didn't. She accepted both. Because acceptance, she had learned, was not something to demand. The letter she finally sent. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Charlotte sat at a wooden desk and wrote a letter she had rewritten dozens of times. Not to the board. Not to the public. To herself. I thought power meant never being questioned. I was wrong. Power was being trusted, and I broke that. I cannot undo the harm. I can only refuse to repeat it. This is not redemption. It is responsibility. She folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the others. Not as a reminder of shame. As a boundary. Elias Morgan's quiet legacy. Elias never spoke publicly about the flight. Not once. No interviews.
No podcasts.
No essays. But his influence spread anyway. Cultural covenants became standard in Morgan and Hale's acquisitions. Executive contracts changed. Language shifted. Zero tolerance disappeared. Replaced by something stricter. Documented accountability. Executives adjusted. Some left. Others learned. Elias watched from a distance. This was never about punishment. It was about recalibration. Their final conversation. It happened by accident. A conference in a city neither of them lived in anymore. Charlotte recognized Elias first. He hadn't changed much. Still quiet. Still observant. She hesitated. Then approached. Elias, she said. He turned. Charlotte. They stood there, unremarkable among the crowd. No tension. No performance. I wanted to thank you, she said finally. Elias studied her face. For what? For not destroying me, she replied. When you could have. Elias shook his head. I didn't save you, he said. You chose what to do after. She nodded. That was the hardest part. They shared a small, respectful silence. Then Elias said, take care, and walked away. No closure speech. No symbolism. Just truth. The young analyst. Months later, a junior analyst at a firm Elias had recently advised raised a concern during a meeting. Her voice shook. The room went quiet. Old instincts stirred. But the senior executive paused. Let's hear her out, he said. The analyst spoke. She was right. The room adjusted. Elias noticed. He didn't smile. He simply noted the absence of fear. That was enough. Charlotte's last test. An executive once asked her quietly, after a long workshop, do you miss it? The power? Charlotte considered the question. Yes, she said honestly. Sometimes. Then she added, but I don't miss who I was when I had it. The executive nodded. That answer stayed with him longer than any framework ever had. The final image. On a late evening flight, Elias Morgan sat in a window seat. Not first class. Not economy. Just a seat. The cabin lights dimmed. The engines hummed steadily. A flight attendant passed and smiled. "Welcome aboard," she said. Elias nodded politely. As the plane lifted into the dark, he looked out at the scattered lights below. Thousands of lives. Thousands of decisions. Thousands of small moments where power could be used or restrained. The world didn't need louder corrections. It needed quieter ones. Final words. Some people think consequences are loud. They aren't. They're patient. They wait. They arrive when patterns refuse to change. And when they do, they don't ask who you were. They ask who you choose to be next.